A scientist unknowingly made 3 inventions that caused the horrific deaths of millions of people, including himself. Not only that, they lowered the average intelligence of people around the world, increased crime rates, and caused 2 separate environmental disasters that we are still dealing with today. In 1944, a chemist named Clair Patterson, who had just finished his master's degree, began working on the Manhattan Project, where the first nuclear weapons were developed and assembled. His task was to separate uranium-235, the fissile fuel used inside bombs, from the much more abundant uranium-238. This process required massive machines, mass spectrometers, capable of separating the 2 types of uranium based on their extremely small difference in mass. After the war ended, Patterson returned to university to pursue a PhD and chose a research topic that would allow him to take advantage of his experience with mass spectrometers, determining the age of the Earth. Radioactive rocks function like clocks. Uranium-238 decays into thorium, then protactinium, and through 12 additional decay steps, eventually becomes lead-206, a stable element. The rate of this decay is constant and measurable. It takes approximately 4.5 billion years for half of a sample of U-238 to decay into lead-206. Patterson's doctoral project aimed to determine the age of the Earth by measuring the uranium-to-lead ratio in primordial rocks. However, to calibrate his instruments, he first used zircon crystals whose ages were already known. Zircon is ideal for this purpose because when it forms, it contains trace amounts of uranium, but absolutely no lead. Therefore, any lead later found inside a zircon crystal must be the product of uranium decay. Patterson was responsible for measuring the amount of lead, while another experienced student, George Tilton, measured the uranium content. Tilton's uranium measurements were largely consistent with predictions. However, Patterson's lead measurements were inconsistent and vastly higher than expected. When we combined George's uranium measurements with my lead results, it didn't work, Patterson said. There was lead present that simply should not have been there. So where was this excess lead coming from? This strange mystery would come to dominate the rest of Clair Patterson's life and would quite literally take him to the ends of the earth. In 1908, a woman in Detroit was crossing the Belle Isle Bridge when her car suddenly stalled. A passing driver traveling along the same route stopped to help her. At the time, cars were started using a primitive hand-cranked mechanism. The man bent down and turned the crank several times and the engine started. But before he could move away, the crank suddenly spun back, struck him in the face, and shattered his jaw. He later died from his injuries. The man's name was Byron Carter, and he owned his own automobile company. He was well connected within Detroit's automotive community. One of his close friends was Henry Leland, the founder of Cadillac. Leland was deeply shaken by his friend's death and decided to eliminate hand cranks from automobiles altogether. Leland hired Charles to develop a car that could start on its own without external force. By 1911, a fully functional prototype had been created. Hand cranking was difficult and dangerous and was generally considered a task for men, but a self-starting car changed everything. Cars would now be easier, safer, and more practical for everyone. The world's first crankless car was the Cadillac Model 30. Compared to previous vehicles, It was extremely powerful. It had a top speed of 45 miles per hour and produced 40 horsepower, roughly twice that of the popular Ford Model T. The Model 30 was a massive success for Cadillac, doubling the company's annual sales. Demand was so high that lines of customers stretched down the streets. However, there was a serious problem. The engine was deafeningly loud. In internal combustion engines, a piston compresses a fuel-air mixture, which is then ignited by a spark from the spark plug. The expanding hot gases push the piston downward. The problem with the Model 30 engine was that it compressed the fuel-air mixture much more forcefully than previous models. As a result, the fuel often ignited spontaneously before the spark plug fired. This led to poorly timed, chaotic explosions inside the cylinder, creating turbulent pressure waves. The resulting noise became known as engine knocking. Knocking was not only unpleasant to hear, but it also reduced engine performance, lowered power output, and decreased fuel efficiency. The vibrations damaged pistons and cylinder walls, significantly shortening. The good news was that engine knocking could be reduced by changing the fuel. Different fuels can withstand different levels of compression before igniting. For example, N-heptane ignites under very little compression, while iso-octane can withstand much higher compression before auto-igniting, making it far less likely to cause knocking. To measure a fuel's resistance to compression, scientists developed the octane rating system. Iso-octane was arbitrarily assigned a value of 100 and N-heptane a value of 0. Real fuels are mixtures of many hydrocarbons, but the octane rating indicates the equivalent mixture of iso-octane and heptane. For instance, 98-octane fuel performs like a mixture of 98% iso-octane and 2% heptane. High-performance luxury cars require high-octane fuel to prevent knocking in their high-compression engines. Kettering wanted to find an additive that would increase the octane rating of ordinary fuel and eliminate knocking in high-compression engines. For this task, he hired a 27-year-old engineer named Thomas Midgley Jr. Midgley experimented with countless substances, ranging from melted butter and camphor to ethyl acetate and aluminum chloride. He later remarked, "Most of them had about as much effect as trying to empty a bathtub with the faucet running." Ethanol was one exception. It reduced knocking, but it needed to make up about 10% of the fuel mixture to be effective. Ethanol was expensive and made profits difficult. Midgley was searching for an additive that was cheap, easy to manufacture, and effective even in very small amounts. Then he tried tellurium. It worked extremely well as an anti-knock agent, but had an unbearable smell that could not be removed by washing or changing clothes. People covered their noses when he walked past. His wife was so disgusted that Midgley was forced to sleep on a small couch in the basement for 7 months. He later wrote, "Even if this doubled fuel efficiency, I do not believe humanity would tolerate the smell." On December 3, 1921, after 5 years of effort, Midgley believed he had found the perfect solution: tetraethyl lead. With a lead atom at its center, this compound was exact for. It eliminated knocking, had no odor, was inexpensive, widely available, and effective at concentrations as low as 1 part per thousand. Midgley called Kettering and said, "Can you imagine how much money we're going to make? $200 million, maybe even more. In today's money, that would exceed $3 billion. For this discovery, the American Chemical Society awarded Midgley the prestigious Nichols Medal and invited him to give public lectures. He firmly refused. He and Kettering patented the production process and named the additive ethyl, likely to confuse it with ethyl alcohol, carefully avoiding any mention of lead. They then partnered with General Motors, DuPont, and Standard Oil of New Jersey to form the Ethyl Corporation. Their marketing was extremely successful. No one can examine the remarkable record of achievement in this research division without confidence that these men are working toward the future, seeking new facts that will make life easier and better for all of us. At the 1923 Indianapolis 500, nearly all of the top 5 finishing cars used ethyl, and demand for leaded gasoline skyrocketed. To keep up, a new chemical plant was built in New Jersey. However, disaster struck almost immediately. Within a month of operation, dozens of workers suffered lead poisoning and 5 died. Public outrage followed. To calm concerns, Midgley held a demonstration in which he poured tetraethyl lead over his hands and inhaled it for a full minute, claiming he could do this daily without harm. In reality, Midgley was well aware of the danger. He had refused public speaking engagements because he spent much of 1923 in Florida recovering from lead poisoning himself. He avoided contact with the product whenever possible. Lead is extremely dangerous even in small amounts. It mimics calcium in the body, making it difficult to eliminate. Like calcium, it can be stored in bones for years, continuing to poison the body long after exposure. The organ most sensitive to lead is the brain. Lead damages the myelin sheath around axons and interferes with neurotransmitter release. Common symptoms include headaches, memory loss, and tingling in the hands and feet. Children are vulnerable, and exposure can cause permanent learning disabilities and behavioral disorders. The dangers of lead had been known for centuries. As early as 1786, Benjamin Franklin warned that lead had been used for far too long despite its known toxicity, writing, "You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced." Franklin would have been horrified to learn that scientists would later plan to add lead to gasoline. Doctors and public health officials from MIT, Harvard, Yale, and the U.S. Public Health Service warned Midgley to stop producing tetraethyl lead, calling it a malicious poison and a severe threat to public health. Their warnings were ignored. By the 1950s, millions of drivers around the world were burning leaded gasoline and releasing it into the atmosphere. Some of this lead contaminated Clair Patterson's zircon samples, preventing him from determining their age. In 1952, Patterson moved to Caltech and, suspecting environmental contamination, built an entirely new laboratory from scratch. He removed electrical wiring containing lead solder, cleaned floors and benches daily with ammonia, and ensured that air was constantly blown out of the room. Entry required wearing a special plastic suit. Patterson had effectively invented the clean room. Inside this lab, he turned his attention to meteorites, the oldest rocks in the solar system. Earth's primordial rocks had long since been destroyed by tectonic activity, but meteorites originated from asteroids formed at the same time as Earth and had drifted through space until entering the atmosphere. Measuring the age of meteorites was therefore the key to determining Earth's age. Patterson analyzed 5 meteorites using 3 different radiometric dating methods and found them all to be approximately 4.55 billion years old, within 0.15% of the currently accepted age of the Earth. Before this work, scientists believed Earth was about 1 billion years younger. Although Patterson had determined the age of the Earth, his fight against lead was far from over. Public concern about lead continued to grow, but Standard Oil President Frank Howard responded by saying, "We do not feel justified in giving up what has come to the industry like a gift from heaven on the mere possibility that it may be hazardous." The Ethel Corporation claimed that lead was a natural part of the environment and therefore harmless. Patterson questioned just how natural environmental lead truly was. He began by measuring lead levels in the oceans. If the lead were natural, concentrations would be uniform regardless of depth. Instead, samples from the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans down to 4 kilometers deep showed lead concentrations near the surface to be 10 to 20 times higher, clear evidence of recent pollution. To determine when this pollution began, Patterson traveled to Greenland and Antarctica. Ice cores record atmospheric lead levels going back thousands of years. They revealed elevated lead levels over the past 4,500 years, all due to human activity, particularly metal smelting. The data showed declines during the Black Death in the 1300s, and dramatic increases during the 20th century due to industrialization and tetraethyl lead. Patterson then examined lead levels in the teeth and bones of recently deceased Americans and compared them to those of Peruvian and Egyptian mummies over 1,600 years old. He expected modern Americans to have about 100 times more lead, but the results showed nearly 1,000 times more. Studies of baby teeth demonstrated that even lead exposure far below safe levels caused learning difficulties, IQ reduction, and increased behavioral problems. With the exception of the lead industry, there is broad consensus that lead is highly toxic even at extremely low doses. As far as we know today, there is no safe level of lead exposure. The world is less intelligent today because of leaded gasoline. Crime rates in the United States rose steadily from the 1970s through the 1990s and then suddenly declined. This trend closely mirrors preschool blood lead levels, offset by about 20 years. While lead is not responsible for all crime, extensive research shows it likely contributed significantly. Estimating the total death toll from lead is difficult. One of its lesser-known effects is hardening of the arteries, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease. A 2018 study found that lead exposure was responsible for approximately 350,000 heart disease deaths per year in the U.S. Assuming a constant rate, this amounts to 25 million deaths in the U.S. alone, with global estimates approaching or exceeding 100 million. This catastrophe stems from Midgley's decision to add lead to gasoline despite knowing it was toxic. And the problem is not over. Current estimates indicate that lead causes 500,000 to 900,000 deaths annually. According to a 2020 UNICEF report, 1 in 3 children worldwide, over 800 million, has blood lead levels at or above 5 micrograms per deciliter. While much of this exposure now comes from batteries and industrial processes, part of it remains Midgley's legacy. After his success with Ethel, Midgley was assigned another engineering challenge. GM also manufactured household appliances, and refrigerators posed a serious danger. The two most common refrigerants were methyl formate and sulfur dioxide. One highly toxic, the other flammable. Midgley was tasked with developing a safer alternative. In 1928, he created dichlorodifluoromethane, a non-toxic and non-flammable compound. GM named it Freon. To demonstrate its safety at an American Chemical Society event, Midgley inhaled the gas and extinguished a candle with his breath. This led to yet another environmental disaster: depletion of the ozone layer. As ozone thins, more ultraviolet radiation reaches Earth, increasing rates of skin cancer and cataracts. Historian John McNeill wrote that Midgley had a greater impact on Earth's atmosphere than any other organism in history. The Montreal Protocol, which banned CFCs, came into effect in 1989. The ozone layer is now recovering, but full recovery will take many decades, possibly centuries. In 1940, at age 51, Midgley became paralyzed after contracting polio. He designed a system of ropes and pulleys to help himself get out of bed. On November 2, 1944, he became entangled in the apparatus and died by strangulation. Thanks to Clair Patterson's work, it became clear that lead in our environment is not natural. Leaded gasoline and internal combustion engines spread this toxic element everywhere, into the air, the oceans, Antarctic snow, and even our bones. Japan was the first country to ban leaded gasoline in 1986. Algeria was the last in 2021. Leaded fuel is still used today, particularly in piston-driven aircraft engines. That lead may still be circulating in our bodies. The next time you see a car on the road, think twice. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Take good care of yourselves, eat well, live healthy lives, and spend time with the people you love. Stay safe.